Hi everybody. In this first week, we're going to just start to get comfortable with how JavaScript fits into the web development umbrella. A lot of this first chapter from the Mirac book involves what exactly JavaScript does. And it's got a couple of examples, but in order to do what we need to do, we kind of have to brush up and review a little bit on the HTML necessary for JavaScript to work. JavaScript controls the browser. It's called a front-end language for that reason. Modern JavaScript actually allows us to store things too. So what you might be familiar with is, a database. Well, JavaScript is now the language that sort of can do all of it. We can even make native mobile apps with JavaScript. So this lecture is more about what you need this week to move forward. And the Mirac book, I find it really thorough and good for a course like this. So it might be a little boring. Get to know it, get to like it. The code it provides is quite good. I do a lot with that code, and I like to share that code with you and have you do assignments based on that code. Not all the code from the book is good either. It's not always perfect, so it's kind of fun to catch the author with things that can be improved. So our objectives for this first week, we need to get comfy with Chrome. Some of you folks will be using Firefox, I realize that. But Chrome is what I'll be using, so it'll help you understand a lot about how JavaScript runs. So we're going to be using Chrome. We're going to be using the Devtools. I'll be using Sublime as a text editor. You can feel free to use whatever you want. You see number 3 here. It talks about using an IDE, an integrated development environment. And we'll be doing that shortly. We do that in Visual Studio Code with the Advanced JavaScript course. For this course, honestly, you just need a text editor. That's it. You need a text editor and a browser to get through. What I want you to learn from this lecture is exactly what goes into making a web application, what an HTTP request and response is. Just being able to determine and distinguish between static web pages and dynamic web pages. What makes a page dynamic? We'll be going through that in the course a lot. We also need to understand how JavaScript, what it does in a web application. What exactly ECMA script specification is. What is its browser support? We have to review what HTML and CSS we know. How well do we know forms? I know that most HTML classes honestly have that as a weak spot. With web development, your form knowledge needs to be spot on good because that's the one way you communicate with a user. I'll need you to be able to distinguish the HTML5 semantic elements and the div and span elements. Divs, remember, are block level elements, and spans are inline. And the semantic elements are the HTML tags that carry meaning, like article, nav, header, aside, things like that. Also, the attributes, ID, class, title, for, and name. How do we label something? Those are all things that should be known before you get into this course. If they're not, don't fret. But know that that's an important part of how JavaScript works, because JavaScript has access to those attributes that you see in point number 9 right there. The idea of describing the coding for the types of CSS selectors, type, ID, and class. Type meaning what it is. Describe the components of a CSS style rule. Describe the components of a URL. Do you know the get method yet? Those are all important things that need to be learned moving forward. So with a web application, you've got devices to view it, obviously, and you've got a server. So where JavaScript ranks on this is that it's going to be communicating with the server and obviously the web and the device. It is the language that controls the front end. So the following terms should be known. If they're not known yet, we'll learn them here. Client, that's basically the type of browser they're using to view the web application. Web browser, web server. Servers serve up pages, browsers view pages. The network is what delivers the page. Intranet means that it's a private network that only a select few types of devices can view. Local area network is local to that. Let's say you have a company and you have a local area network. The internet itself, wide area network, internet service provider, these are all terms that we'll use a little bit. Don't be too panicky if you don't get everything. But one thing that's going to start to come up is how a web server processes a static web page. So it's basically the server serves it up based on a request. That HTTP request, remember HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That's the method in which you're calling a server. So the browser creates a request to the server and the server delivers it and usually uses markup to display it. Now that is a static web page because we're not doing anything dynamic. We don't have any storage we're pulling up. We're just requesting and responding and rendering. That's it. So pretty simple there. But once we start having dynamic pages like Amazon, we have storage now. And Amazon has a multi-server load balancing system that's globally positioned so that no matter where you are, you get a quick response. It uses an NoSQL database that gets connected locally to all of the major network around it. So it's a very complicated system that allows us to buy things quickly. So what makes it dynamic? Well, dynamic means that we have a shell that you see in front of you right now that is sort of a template, right? And you see it's Amazon.com, but the URL in the web address is a clean URL that describes what's in the page. So basically the request is being made through that URL. And the content that is retrieved from a database based on that URL and is dynamic because other products can fit on the same page. So this is really one page. And it could be something like, products.aspx if it's .NET, or let's pretend it was PHP. It might be something called product.php, and that URL is loading that in there. So it would be the same page for every single product. And it is true that top template, that top header, which is an include, is going to be the same on every page. And that's what makes it dynamic. So the way a web server processes a dynamic page, like the Amazon thing that we just saw, was the web server, when it gets a request, has to call an application server that determines what it needs, and that calls the database and gets the information, returns it to the server, and then returns it to the response. So it necessitates not only the application server, but also the database server, and it does that full-on round trip with several several computer boxes that do the job. So you can see how complicated that can get. JavaScript in most cases sits on the left part of that diagram completely. So occasionally it's in the application server. And in modern web, it is even part of the database server as well. If you've heard of a term called Mongo, that's a database that is run in JavaScript. So this is an example of a dynamic page with JavaScript. So we've got products that have rollovers, so we can roll over the color and see the color of the image. So how is this done? This is done with JavaScript with an event that has an onHover call. Basically, when the user does a certain event, then we take the blue image and switch it with a light image, or whatever the color is that it's being hovered with. I've coded plenty of these with vanilla JavaScript because I do a lot of e-commerce, and it's way easier than you thought. It's basically 2 lines of JavaScript. So, and we'll be doing that in this course. But that's where JavaScript has its hand in the modern web. So this is right here. It tells you that the HTTP response is going to be with HTML and JavaScript. So let's say the clothes get served up, 5 different colors of shirts load, and then the JavaScript detects the browser event, the hover, and then programmatically replaces the picture with the one that the user decided on. So this is called scripting. It's not really programming, it's more scripting because it's fitting inside the HTML and working with the HTML. The JavaScript engine is built inside the browser. It's very light. We'll be learning a lot about that in this course. Sometimes we use jQuery, which is a JavaScript library of shorthanded JavaScript calls. We'll be doing that in this course. And the word client simply means that that's the browser. The JavaScript is working with the browser. So in here we do see the modern web server with potentially JavaScript files. Does that happen often? It's starting to, certainly. With, if you've ever heard the term mean stack or MERN stack, those are full stack elements with just JavaScript. So what is a full stack? Well, a full stack means the front end, where the user sees the work, and the middleware, the languages that talk to the server and respond to the browser, and then the server itself. So when you hear full stack developer, that means that you can not only do the visual, but you can provide functionality and storage. So that's kind of what we try to achieve in this program, is full stack developers. Anyway, so one of the most common uses of JavaScript and jQuery are data validation, form validation, making sure what a user enters is what we expect. Also, controlling images, controlling elements on a page and movement, and doing slideshows. Those are the most common. If you've ever seen like a carousel, that's JavaScript. Now, this is an important thing because the versions and the release dates tell you a little bit about how we're going to be coding. Now, almost the original JavaScript, okay, goes way back, well over 20 years ago. And I actually remember doing early JavaScript right about that time. So I've actually been with JavaScript since it started. The ECMA stands for Eastern Europe Computer Manufacturers Association, and they were the people who created this to begin with. Most of the JavaScript you see online will be ECMA 2015. ES6 is 2016, and we'll be seeing a lot of that as well. So versions get released. The last 4 or 5 versions were improvements on the language, but not massive improvements, not massive changes. So the ES5 is, in strict mode is not going to make sense to you right now, but ES5 has, it's very common, and you're going to see it in a lot of tutorials. So I'm just relating this. Some of this complicated verbiage is going to be a little bit confusing if you haven't had some time with JavaScript. So ES5 started in 2015. That is the it added a lot to the way we create JavaScript. Now, one thing of note here is that JavaScript object notation, that is a format of data. So I want you to pretend like you are working full-time as a developer, front end, you're a JavaScript expert, and you need to implement a weather widget on a website. So this weather is going to take the current weather wherever the user is and output it to their browser. And the data format that we're going to be using for that is JavaScript object notation. So those methods were first built in ES5. This is more of an overview. You don't need to memorize it. ES6 is the big thing. That's the addition of syntactic improvements, a lot of shorthand functions like arrow functions. So there's a lot of new improvements. So we're going to get good at all this. This part, the ES6, that we're going to get good at in advanced JavaScript. We'll hit that toward the end of the course, but right now we're looking at ES5 mostly in this course, and then we'll work into the more complicated things there. So more versions came around, and again, these things are very subtle. So that's more of a advanced JavaScript thing, but we'll be doing basics, fundamentals in this course, and then in the last class I do a sort of a what's coming down the pike for the next course in JavaScript, and in that course we start with a first class where we basically do a review of everything and what's next. And that's where we get really good at all the more recent versions of JavaScript and what they offer us. Okay, so the next thing is the browsers that support ECMA. And you can see almost all of these do. So it's hard to find a browser that doesn't. And this link right here has a browser compatibility table. This book was released in 2020 from the copyright. So the ES 2020 now are all supported by modern browsers. But you'll know because you're going to try it. You're going to run your code and test it in a modern browser. So you're going to see a lot of things like this that I give you. This is a email join list, and it's got a form, and it's got an email address and a confirm email address and first name. This is something very typical, not only of this text, but of this course, and also what JavaScript does. So if someone enters their email address and they confirm that email address, we're going to use JavaScript to make sure that this matches that. That's what JavaScript does. So for now, let's say we have an HTML page and we have a file name index. This is an HTML comment. Link and style elements all go here, as you probably know already from WebD 152 or just having some experience with HTML. Now, that is important. We're going to put style. All CSS should go here, and all link elements like links to JavaScript need to go there. You might see scripts in the footer as well. We put scripts here so that the page loads and then this has access to those elements. So most script elements will go above the closing body tag. So this is the same page that you saw with CSS applied to it. And this is an example of a link. Oops, excuse me. I got excited there. Look at that. So this is an example of link relationship style sheet, href equals email list.css. And that CSS might have something like body and h1 color blue. Just a little sort of review of CSS and HTML and how they work together. So this is modifying everything in the body, and this is modifying everything that has an h1 tag. So we've got any div, they all have a margin bottom. Any label has display inline block. Any input, and this is all inputs, have margins and span color red. So what we have here at the bottom is script source email underscore list.js. This is inside the body element, right above the closing body tag. And this is our JavaScript. So you haven't learned this yet, but let's take hypothetically the emails must match that we were just talking about. Remember how email, the first email we have? Well, we're going to be targeting that and getting the value attribute of the first email and putting it in a variable called email1. Again, you haven't learned even what a variable is yet. Then we'll be taking a variable called email2 and getting that value and putting in and just testing to see if they're the same. But we'll get through this. I'm going to speed through this because it's part of my lecture anyway. It's part of the hands-on part of this course. These are the primary HTML5 semantic elements. Semantic meaning that they carry meaning to search engines, screen readers, etc. Figure for images, the footer, the header, the main, section, article, aside, nav. I expect you guys to know that from WebD 152. And this is an example of a page that's structured with those elements. You've got your header, main, and footer. And this is a page displayed in a browser. Now, this right here is a CDN or content delivery network for something called a JavaScript shiv for HTML5 compatibility. So what does this do? It makes sure that anything that, if your browser doesn't have HTML5, that the JavaScript will define those new HTML5 elements for the page. So let's say the browser doesn't have something, then you would have this shiv in there. These are all pretty valuable things. So as you read the text, you'll see that this is covered in there as well. I mean, the most basic tags that we have are div and span for block level and inline elements. This is a good example of div elements for a JavaScript application. We're going to be doing this later on, where we have a drop-down, kind of a drawer. On click, we'll open the drawer, and on click, we'll close it. We'll have a toggle. We'll be having span IDs, where we replace the star with error messages. And these are the basic HTML attributes: ID, class, name, for, and title. These are all things that are inside HTML. And here's an example of those attributes. If you haven't done it before, the class equals first underscore h2. That class will be a dot in the CSS. This is an ID. This is a name attribute. The label for has to match the ID so that when the user clicks on it, their cursor goes into the input type. So these are all super important things. Again, if you have this is a tooltip for the text box. So we've got the styles, link, style sheet, styles, main CSS. Remember, that goes in the head tag, and this also goes in the head tag. So one thing that's important is you want the style from the external style sheet to be loaded first before any embedded styles. That's why this is above that. So this is a head element with two style sheets, the main and the speaker. So the first external style sheet is loaded first, then the last. So if we have the same element styled, the last one will override the top. And this is HTML that can be selected by type, ID, or class. We've got the class here, we've got the ID and the class here, or we have main and footer. So here's main, here's class, here's ID, and that's elements by type have the selectors that are tags. The ID takes a hashtag, and classes take the dot. So that's a little bit of a review right there. I know kind of went through it pretty fast, but it's important. And with that previous CSS, we have what we see here. The CSS file for a typical application has a body tag because all of these styles will be inherited by their children of the body. And then we have our selectors and our styles. So with CSS, we have the style rules, property declarations, names, and values. So we have our selectors, what property we want, and its value. So I'll be forwarding the book app stuff for you. This will be inside the course. I'll show you right here. You can see what other groovy stuff I have here. But what's neat is they give you the book apps here. And this is the email list that they're talking about. So I'm going to actually put this in Sublime, and you'll see that my code comes here. And here's a little bit of JavaScript that you can take a look at. And this will be kind of how the course goes. So if I go to my browser, close this, and we do index, you would see what is in the lecture. So that's our lecture section. Now, this is one of those things, 4 ways to run an HTML that's on your own server or computer. You're not going to need a server for this course at all. Don't think you need one, you don't. But from your computer, just open the browser. You can use, I'll show you a couple ways. If you go here, like I've already kind of showed you how to open this stuff, but I can do File, Open File, and then navigate to the same files that I was just talking about. And we've got, I forget what it is here, but it's slides, short. Gotta find it here. Student download. Oh yeah, book apps right here. So this is it, and you can navigate to whatever your page is that way. And you can always hit Option Command U if you're on a Mac, and you can see the text there, but you won't be able to change it. The other way is whatever text editor you have, you can drag the folder into the software, or you can do File, Open, and just do the same thing, navigate to the files. But it's going to be how we're going to work throughout. And we might be making changes and then running it. So this week it's good to get used to that workflow, see what you like. I use a 2-monitor system with my laptop, so I have the code in one monitor, the design in another, but for my videos I always just put everything on the same computer. So, this is, once you put your work on a server, which we will show you how to do in this course, we do it through what's called an FTP client, and you'll be able to see your work on the internet. And that's always a big step, and I think you folks have already probably done that with WebD 152. So here's the thing here. The protocol is always this. Now, there are two protocols. One is HTTP, the other one is HTTPS. The HTTPS has an S because it's called secure. And that means it has what's called a secure socket layer, which means that it's a one-on-one connection between the computer and the server for the duration that the user uses that web page. And that way no one else can go in and see what's happening. This is your domain name, a pathway, and a file. So if you omit any parts of this, you won't get the right page loaded up. So we're going to be using Devtools, which I've already shown you briefly, but it's going to show us errors, which is beautiful. When you have an error, it'll give you the line in the JavaScript, the file and the line number. And you can actually just click on this thing right here, and it'll actually open up the error, which is awesome. So these are the shortcuts to open Chrome's Devtools. For me, it's just easier to go into Chrome like this and click the 3 dots, do more tools, and just do Devtools. This is Shift-Command-I. It's another way to do it, but get used to that. I hope you get to a point where you're using, tools for everything. Like, let's say you go into CNN and you go inspect, and these are all fun things to do. But if I inspect let's see if we can find it. Oh, there's our. You can go in here and just add. C-Corps wanted Pence to overturn the 2020 election. And you can leave it up for your family. I like to go into my bank software and add a few zeros, so to speak. So this is kind of fun to get used to the whole Devtools. We'll be doing this. It'll be fun. I think it's fun. I'm sort of dorky like that. Yeah, we'll be doing a heck of a lot of error and debugging too in the console. And this is what I was just talking about, clicking the link on the right. Just things that I wanted you to see. So this is the source panel. If you go into the sources panel of Chrome, you're going to see the entire script. You see the red X. That's your error. Very cool stuff. I thank God every day for the Chrome Devtools. This is a dialog box for choosing a folder in Visual Studio Code. Again, feel free to use it. It can be a little more complicated than just a traditional text editor like Sublime. So this is what I was just going over, and this is the I'm going to actually give you this folder as a zip, and each week I'll show you the code that we're going to be working with. So this slide is about naming, adding, or deleting a folder, and that's something that's as simple as hitting enter with your cursor there and just writing over. But Windows and Mac are a little bit different. So what I'm going to do right now is compress this and remove it, and then compress the book apps, and I'm going to upload that to, we'll let it go for a while, but I'm going to put that up in our course, and then you'll have that, so you don't have to look around for it or develop it. That'll be in the week 1 materials this week. Okay, so a couple more things to show. Visual Studio has files in standard and preview mode. One of the things to be cautious about is preview mode is not going to render the way a browser would. So, while it might help you do things quickly, be aware that it's not Chrome, it's not a standard browser, the preview. You want to make sure that the browser is what does your rendering at this level. So we'll stop there. So for now, because I don't want to overwhelm you with tech on this thing, but you're encouraged to experiment with whatever you like in this course. Don't get to a point where you're dependent on the preview mode. Just find a text editor that you like and you'll be fine. Okay, because a lot of the code is going to be given to you. And the code is going to be usually one script. It's not going to be a folder full of objects, but we're going to get to all that. Anyway, that's chapter 1, just about modern landscape, the tools we're going to be using, what you need to know to get in and to understand what we're going to be doing in this course. And I just hope you guys like it. I hope that you feel free to come and reach me whenever you need help.